Okay, so today we're taking a deep dive into presentations. Those things that we all have to do sometimes. And we're going to figure out what actually makes a presentation land. Not just, get the information across, but really stick with people.
Mm.
So think of this as like your cheat sheet to understanding what makes some speakers just so much more captivating than others.
Yeah, exactly. So in this deep dive, we're on a mission to figure out, I guess, what you could call the essential elements of really compelling communication. And we've gone deep. We've watched hundreds of TED Talks, like over 150 hours of content, talked to some top communication experts, and even looked at some pretty cool stuff from neuroscience and psychology.
And just so everyone's on the same page, TED, which stands for Technology, Education, Design,
Yeah.
is basically this amazing online platform where some of the brightest minds share their big ideas. And the best part, it's all free to watch online.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, TED Talks. Those are for like huge names, celebrities, experts, not for me. But here's the thing. The core techniques that make TED Talks so powerful, well, they're actually super useful in tons of everyday situations. Think about it. Pitching a project at work, sharing an idea with friends, even just talking to your family about, I don't know, vacation plans.
Totally. We've gone through this mountain of material, all those TED Talks, the expert interviews, the brain science research. And what's really interesting is that even though speakers have all sorts of different styles, some are storytellers, some are super visual, there are some common threads that run through all the really engaging presentations.
So the question for you as we go through all this is, what are those key things that the best communicators in the world are doing? And how can you take those techniques and use them to become more impactful in your own presentations and, well, just your everyday life?
Awesome. So when we looked at what actually makes presentations stick, we found that it boils down to three core things. We call them the three pillars of engaging presentations:
Mhm.
emotional, novel, and memorable.
Exactly. And we're going to break each of those down. First up, emotional connection.
All right, so let's talk about how to really touch people's hearts with a presentation. I mean, you can have the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if you're not passionate about them, they're not going to land right.
It's true. You've got to have that fire. Think about Tony Robbins. He gave a TED Talk and said, I'm a learning machine, and this is the place to learn. You could just feel his energy and excitement.
And there's actual research that backs this up. Melissa Cardin, who studies what's called entrepreneurial passion, found that passion is a huge driver of energy and commitment. So if you're truly passionate about your topic, that passion becomes contagious.
Yeah, and Richard Branson's a great example. He always talks about how important it is to inspire people. And you can tell how passionate he is about learning and pushing boundaries.
And get this, passion is literally contagious. There are studies on something called mood contagion, which show that positive emotions like passion and genuine enthusiasm can actually lift the spirits of your audience.
That reminds me of Mathieu Ricard. He's sometimes called the happiest man in the world. And his TED Talk on happiness is so powerful because you can tell he's deeply committed to the topic and wants to help people with his insights.
And he actually made the point that when you're really passionate about something, public speaking becomes less about you and your nerves and more about sharing something valuable with your audience.
I love that. And, Oprah Winfrey and Steve Jobs have both talked about how important it is to follow your passion and do work that you love. Like Jobs said in his famous Stanford commencement speech, your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do.
Right. But Larry Smith, who gave a TEDx talk, made the point that even though that's such common advice, people are often afraid to actually follow it. Fear of failure, fear of looking silly,
Yeah.
all that stuff. So yeah, tapping into that genuine passion is like step number one in communicating effectively.
And that passion, like Melissa Cardin was saying, actually triggers emotional experiences. It engages your brain and your body in ways that make you a more dynamic speaker.
Okay, so passion is the spark. Now, to really connect on an emotional level, we have to talk about storytelling. It's the way to reach people's hearts and their minds at the same time.
Absolutely. Think about Brian Stevenson's TED Talk. He holds the record for the longest standing ovation in TED history, and a whopping 65% of that talk was storytelling. That tells you something.
And it's not just about keeping people entertained. Brain scans show that stories actually light up the brain in a way that just straight facts often don't. They create a deeper connection between the speaker and the audience, so people are more likely to understand and agree with your perspective.
Stevenson's amazing at using storytelling to break down resistance. He works with judges, juries, people who might not agree with him at first. But he weaves his stories into this powerful theme of identity, and it makes his arguments way more persuasive.
And don't think storytelling is only for like these big, dramatic personal stories. Even if you're giving a presentation with lots of data, a well-placed story can make that data so much more relatable and engaging.
Dale Carnegie was talking about the power of storytelling way back in the 1900s. He said, "The great truths of the world have often been couched in fascinating stories." He was so right. And now with neuroscience, we can actually understand why.
So there's this really cool study by Lauren Silbert. She told a personal story about prom while people were in an fMRI machine. And get this, when she told the story, the listener's brains actually synced up with hers, activating emotional and sensory areas. But when they couldn't understand the language, this brain coupling didn't happen.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you tell a good story, you're literally getting your audience's brains on the same wavelength as yours.
Exactly. So Andrew Stanton, who wrote Toy Story, said it perfectly. We all love stories. We're born for them. Stories affirm who we are. And they connect us to each other and make sense of our experiences.
So what kind of stories work best in presentations?
Well, there are basically three types that are really effective. Personal stories that connect to your message. Stories about other people that illustrate a point. And even stories about brands or products.
Brian Stevenson tells these incredibly moving stories about his grandmother and this janitor, really powerful personal narratives. And then there's Sir Ken Robinson's famous story about Gillian Lynn, who was misdiagnosed as having a learning disability when really she was just passionate about dance. She ended up choreographing Cats and Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, and Malcolm Gladwell has that amazing story about how Howard Moskowitz basically reinvented spaghetti sauce for Campbell's and Prego. It's all about understanding what customers actually want, even when they can't explain it themselves. And Peter Guber, he produced movies like Batman, talks about how crucial storytelling is in business. He uses the pitch for Magic Johnson Theaters and an example of how a good story can really persuade people and inspire action.
And if you're not sure how to structure a story, Kurt Vonnegut had this awesome idea. He mapped out different story shapes on a graph of good fortune, ill fortune versus beginning end. He thought all the really powerful stories followed those basic patterns.
That's a really cool idea. Okay, so we've got passion, we've got storytelling. Now let's talk about another really important part of connecting emotionally, making your presentation feel like a conversation. Speaking in a natural, genuine way, almost like you're chatting with a friend.
Absolutely. When you're trying to persuade someone, it all comes down to rapport and trust. If your words and your body language don't match up, your audience will sense it and they won't trust your message.
Yeah. Think about the idea of the 10,000 hours to master a skill. It totally applies to public speaking. Even someone like Steve Jobs, who seemed so naturally charismatic, wasn't always a polished speaker. In his early days, he could get pretty nervous. He got so much better over time by practicing and really honing his delivery.
And the speed you talk at matters too. Studies on audiobooks show that the ideal pace is somewhere around 150, 160 words per minute. But for presentations, you can actually go a little faster because people are getting more visual and sensory input.
Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, she's awesome. She often uses an actual human brain as a prop to explain neuroscience, even to kids. Her delivery is so engaging.
You know, there's that statistic that gets thrown around a lot. 7% of communication is verbal and 93% is nonverbal. While that exact number might not be totally accurate, research used by professionals like interrogators shows that how you say something and your body language have a huge impact on how people perceive you.
That's where the idea of command presence comes in. Great leaders and speakers often have this confidence about them. They know their stuff, they make eye contact, their posture is good, they use gestures deliberately, and they project their voices. Think about Colin Powell's TED Talk. His hand gestures emphasize his points. Or Ernesto Ciroli. He's super expressive. Remember his hippo story?
And Jennifer Granholm is great too. She's got this energetic, engaging style. She keeps her hand gestures within this space called her power sphere. It helps project confidence without being too all over the place.
And have you heard of Amy Cuddy's research on body language? It's fascinating. She talks about this fake it till you make it idea that if you act confident, even if you don't feel it, it can actually change your internal state and how others see you.
I love that. Tony Robbins has these whole pre-presentation rituals to get himself in the zone. Lots of movement, affirmations, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need to jump on a trampoline before you give a presentation, but a little physical prep can totally boost your energy and make your delivery better.
Totally. And Janine Shepard, she gave this amazing presentation about overcoming paralysis. And she said, My real strength never came from my body. Her presence was just so powerful and vulnerable.
So we've talked about connecting emotionally through passion, storytelling, and conversational delivery. Now let's dive into the second element of really engaging presentations. Novelty, the idea of giving your audience a fresh perspective or teaching them something they didn't know before.
Yeah. Our brains are hardwired to be curious. We love new information, things we haven't heard before. It gets us thinking in new ways.
Robert Ballard, the guy who discovered the Titanic, said, "Everything I'm going to present to you wasn't in my textbooks when I went to school." He's all about exploring and discovering new things.
And James Cameron, he's also a deep sea explorer and a famous filmmaker, said, curiosity is the most important thing you own. He credits his curiosity for all of his successes. Even Peter Gabriel, the musician, has talked about how much he loves learning new things at events like TED.
There's a real evolutionary reason why we're so drawn to new information. John Medina, he's a developmental molecular biologist, says that humans have basically adapted by getting smarter. We're always hungry for knowledge.
So how do we bring novelty into our presentations? One way is to take something your audience might already know and present it in a new way, or offer a new solution to a problem they think they understand. Think about how Intel explained their Turbo Boost technology. They didn't get super technical. They talked about how it would benefit the everyday computer user.
And remember dopamine, that neurochemical that's part of our brain's reward system. It gets released when we learn new things. It's almost like a save button for our brains, helping us remember new information. So when you teach your audience something new, you're actually making your presentation more memorable too.
Hans Rosling, he was a master at presenting data in a way that was both novel and engaging. He used these amazing visualizations to show the connection between global fertility rates and life expectancy. His presentations really challenged people's assumptions about the world.
We've even seen this in the business world. Executive giving those standard corporate updates, when they incorporated personal stories to make the data more relatable, they got much higher ratings from investors.
Susan Cain did this really well in her TED Talk. She challenged the idea that extroverts are the only ones with good ideas. She taught people something new about the power of introverts.
Charlie Rose said it well. Truly great conversations and presentations take you on a ride, on a journey. They grab you and you hear the sense of rhythm and it goes and builds. Ultimately, it may even take you to ideas you'd never considered. That's the power of novelty.
It's important to distinguish novelty from cliches, though. Cliches are those overused phrases and ideas that don't really offer any fresh insight. They're tired. John Gray's Men are from Mars, Women are from Venus was groundbreaking at the time because it offered a new way of looking at relationships. That's why it had such a huge impact.
Yeah. And the Flynn effect, which is basically the idea that IQ scores have been going up over time, shows that as a society, we're getting smarter. So our presentations have to keep up. We need to offer genuinely new ideas.
One technique to make sure your presentations have novelty is to try and summarize your main message in a Twitter-friendly headline, something short and catchy that captures the most important takeaway. A lot of really successful TED Talk titles do this.
Like Ben Saunders, the polar explorer, talks about his addiction to pushing human limits. He connects this to our basic human need to explore. He's saying even in our presentations, we can tap into that curiosity by going beyond the familiar and comfortable.
Oliver Uberti, who does data visualization, encourages us to explore our own origin stories and get creative with how we present our ideas. He's saying that often being truly novel comes from embracing your own perspective and framing things in a way that feels fresh and different.
So we've talked about emotional connection and novelty. Now let's talk about the last pillar of engaging presentations. Memorability. Making sure your ideas stick with people long after the presentation's over.
You can have the most emotional and groundbreaking ideas, but if people forget them, those ideas don't go anywhere. One way to make sure your presentation is memorable is to create jaw-dropping moments.
These are moments in your presentation that are shocking, surprising, impressive. They create these really strong memories, like when Bill Gates released mosquitoes during his TED Talk about malaria. Totally unexpected, visceral, and it made his message about preventing malaria incredibly memorable.
Neuroscience tells us that emotionally charged events are just more likely to be encoded in our memories. They're called flashbulb memories. You remember those moments more vividly than everyday events. You can create smaller flashbulb moments in your presentations by tapping into emotion.
Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, using an actual human brain as a prop, is another great example of a memorable visual. It's unexpected, relevant, and it makes her topic way more tangible and memorable.
Steve Jobs was amazing at creating wow moments. He turned his product launches into these huge events, full of surprises. Remember when the Macintosh computer actually spoke for the first time?
There are a few ways you can create those holy smokes moments in your own presentations. Use physical props and demos, like Mark Shaw and his Ultra Ever dry paint demo. Tell emotional stories, especially personal ones. Introduce something unexpected. Use vivid language, analogies, metaphors, and use humor. Think about Elliot Crane comparing chronic pain to a feather and a blowtorch. That's an image you don't forget.
As we said earlier, humor makes you more likable and helps people remember what you said. There's actually research that shows our brains love humor.
Yeah, Dr. Pradeep, a neuromarketing researcher, has shown that our brains respond really positively to humor. And Fabio Sala, who wrote for the Harvard Business Review, says that good humor can actually make managers more effective.
When it comes to using humor, it's often best to start with observational humor, stuff that's relatable, rather than trying to force jokes. Analogies and metaphors are also really good for making complex things more memorable. You're basically explaining something new by connecting it to something people already understand, like calling a computer's CPU the brain. John McWhorter used historical quotes about how terrible youth language is to make a point about how language is always changing.
And you can even use viral videos, like Kevin Alaka did in his TED Talk about why videos go viral. Sometimes authentic, unexpected moments of humor can be super effective too, like the story about that Ritz-Carlton employee who gave a lost stuffed animal the VIP spa treatment.
Okay, let's not forget about how important it is to be concise. The 18-minute rule for TED Talks isn't random. There's actual science behind it.
Yeah. Research suggests that shorter, more focused presentations are better for memory than long, information-packed ones. It's because of something called cognitive backlog or cognitive load. Our brains can only handle so much information at once.
It's like a traffic jam in your brain.
Exactly. And that limited time can actually make you more creative. It forces you to really boil down your message to its essence. Neil Pasricha's talk, The 3 A's of Awesome, is a great example of this. He structured his whole talk about overcoming hard times by focusing on little things around 3 key points.
There's also George Miller's idea of the magical number 7, plus or minus 2. It's the idea that we can only hold about 7 things in our short-term memory at once. More recent research says it's probably closer to 3 or 4, but the point is our brains like information in chunks.
And to make things even more memorable, get those senses involved. Use visuals, audio, even touch if it makes sense. Al Gore's climate change slideshow, Lisa Christine's stories about slavery, those are great examples of using audio and visuals effectively. Amanda Palmer stood on a milk crate during her performance, that USB drive speed demo where they drop it and it breaks. Super memorable.
So we've covered the big 3, emotional, novel, memorable. But there's one last piece that ties everything together. Authenticity, just being yourself.
It's so important to be genuine as a speaker. When you're trying to be someone you're not, it shows.
Sheryl Sandberg's decision to talk about losing her husband in her TED Talk was incredibly powerful and vulnerable. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor also changed her conclusion to be more personal, and it made her message much more impactful.
Richard Branson said, "I don't think of work and play as play. It's all living." I think that captures the idea of bringing your whole self to your communication. When what you're saying is aligned with who you are, it really resonates.
And it's comforting to know that even the best speakers get nervous. Joel Osteen was terrified before his first sermon. Richard Branson has told stories about forgetting what he was going to say. Finding your voice takes time and practice.
At the end of the day, the best communication comes from a place of authenticity and passion. When you're being yourself, your message will connect on a much deeper level.
So, to recap, the presentations that truly grab us and stay with us are emotional, novel, and memorable. They're all about passion, storytelling, authenticity, humor, and teaching people something new.
And remember, these TED-worthy techniques aren't just for big stages. You can use them in your everyday life, at work, with friends, anywhere you're communicating.
So here's something to think about. What's one thing you can change about your communication style to connect better with your audience and make a bigger impact?
We challenge you to think about your past presentations, the good and the bad, and figure out how you can use some of these ideas to improve your communication. It's a journey, not a destination.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.